Hello, guys. I hope everyone is having fun. um, I am going to just share the stream briefly. I was busy trying to prep. So I discovered a terrible thing. I was uploading the Word, the document that I prepped for this live stream, because we're actually going to go through a live stream and everything else. And as I was doing that, I realized that what I should have done is make it a actual PowerPoint presentation. And instead, I made it a document, like just a PDF document. So I'm sorry if you can't fully read all of my notes, but I will go through everything. Let me just tell the Discord that we are live. If you are not in my Discord and you want to be notified of things like this, links down below. All right, cool. So today we are talking about characters and plot and how to use them to create a virtuous cycle of tension, which also feeds your themes, and it allows your themes to naturally come to the surface. And we're going to do this by talking through an example using Game of Thrones from A Song of Ice and Fire. Massive spoiler warnings for the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire. If you haven't read it or you haven't watched the show, I'm going to spoil everything in it. Okay, so fair warning. Hey, Christian. Hey, Junior. Hello, Glacier. Lupex, great to see you. And hi, Biometa. Oh, I've seen your comments. You've been leaving flowers on my videos. Thank you very much for your flowers. I always love engagement, guys. Feel free to leave comments. Hello, Wirbus. Good to see you too. And Carrie, welcome. Okay, so let's get going with this. As I said, I really should have made this a proper, you know, a proper PowerPoint presentation, but there we go. I realized that like 2 minutes before the live stream went live. Okay, so what is this virtuous circle that I'm talking about? It's when your external events, your external tension, your plot tension feeds into your internal tension, your characters' internal stakes, their emotional stakes in the story. And those two feed each other. The one heightens the other. And between them, between creating this tension, they drive the thematic stakes or the philosophical stakes of your story. Okay, so just to differentiate between internal tension and external tension. External tension is the events of the plot. So it's things like, Ned gets called down to King's Landing and has to take on the role of the Hand, and there's all of the events around that. The internal tension is generated by the fact that Ned wants a quiet life. Ned wants to stay at home in Winterfell. His wife wants him to stay at home in Winterfell. But his king wants him in King's Landing, and his king is also his friend. So the plot is pulling him towards Winterfell, and he himself wants towards King's Landing, and he wants to stay in Winterfell. And that conflict is the conflict inside him. It's the internal tension. Okay. So let's just go through this virtuous cycle to understand what happened and what makes A Song of Ice and Fire, and specifically Ned's story, so very, very compelling. And I think it is one of the reasons why Game of Thrones was so successful. That first book was Ned's story. All right, so let's just talk about the external events first. All right, so this is your plot design element. The catalyst for Ned's story is the death of John Arryn, which forces Ned to leave his secure northern world and enter the dangerous political arena of King's Landing. Then his investigation into John Arrane's death uncovers the truth about Joffrey's parentage. And that places Ned in direct opposition to Cersei. And it also invokes Littlefinger to start interacting with Ned. And Littlefinger says to Ned, "You can't trust me." And yet at the same time, Ned does trust Littlefinger. And because of that trust, ultimately is one of the key factors in why Ned is ultimately killed. Then we have the escalation. So instead of handling this information about Joffrey's parentage with like secrecy, and instead of playing into the politics of King's Landing, Ned very, very stupidly warns Cersei about this evidence. Now, I will say that Cersei's whole storyline is equally compelling. And I'll be honest, like her plan to kill Robert was terrible. It it was an atrocious plan. But what you have to remember about Cersei's plan is, though it was bad at the time, it was a plan that she had come up with not as her last ditch plan. Okay. This was just part of an ongoing game of trying to get rid of Robert. But then Ned told her that he was going to go to Robert with what he had discovered about Joffrey's parentage. And that is what sparked panic in her. But by then she already had this half a plan. But really, the catalyst, the reason why Cersei's plan worked, is because of Littlefinger. Littlefinger was the snake in the grass all along there, 100%. Okay. So I just wanted to deviate there and talk about Cersei for a second. All right. So when Robert Baratheon dies, Ned attempts to, he's like, no, this is what's going to happen. Stannis is going to become king. Renly says to Ned, listen, help me become king. No one wants Stannis. And Ned's like, no, Stannis is the elder. And Littlefinger is like, dude. And Cersei, and he's like, Cersei will surely have gone. But no, Cersei hasn't gone. Cersei puts Joffrey on the throne. Ned has no opportunity to do this, and Littlefinger hasn't paid off Janos, and off Ned goes to the dungeons. And now Ned is held in the dungeons. And here he is now confronted with a terrible question. Are you willing to compromise your honor and admit to guilt which you don't have to save your children's lives? And Ned makes, I guess, the choice that anyone would make, right? The choice we would certainly expect an honorable character to make. And he chooses to save his daughters' lives, to ensure their safety, and he confesses to these crimes under the understanding that he will be sent to the wall. But he is not sent to the wall because Joffrey is the absolute monarch, and Joffrey says off with his head. And there are hints, it was never in the show, but there are hints in the books and some rumors that this might have happened, that Littlefinger convinced Joffrey to take Ned's head. Because Cersei obviously wanted Ned sent away because that would stabilize the rule, right? But Littlefinger wanted Ned to lose his head because that would ensure the chaos that would give Littlefinger the opportunity he was looking for. Okay, so those are all the external events. All right, how does our internal events play into this? Let me just say hello to everybody quickly. Hi, Destiny. And yeah, if there are any questions, guys, as always, put them in the chat and I will get to them in between these sections and so on. And yeah, All right, so we are talking about our virtuous plot cycle, and we move on to the internal conflict. All right, so in the internal conflict, Ned Stark's whole internal world is shaped by this concept of his honor and his past experience in the war. Obviously, he had been instrumental in putting Robert Baratheon on the throne. They shared a deep bond. But here's the thing: he knew Robert from the rebellion, not Robert who'd spent the last 10, 20 years, whatever amount of time, sitting in King's Landing dealing with the politics. So he's operating on a vision of Robert that is 20 years out of date. And then the other internal thing about Ned that you have to understand in order to understand his character is he has limited adaptability. He fails to embrace the moral compromises required by King's Landing. And the external events feed into this. Okay? So because you have this conflict that happens between his honor and the pragmatic requirements of the job, because he wants to do what is right. He wants to put Stannis on the throne, okay? Because Stannis is the correct heir. But Stannis is disliked by everyone. Stannis has threatened to hang half of the gold cloaks, right? Because he considers them traitors and whatever. And the thing is, Stannis is known as a man who basically never shows mercy. And we can see that very clearly in how Stannis treated Davos. I mean, Davos saved Stannis's life. And despite that, Stannis took, his fingers off, or like the tips of his fingers off. And that so clearly showed us why Stannis, with that very uncompromising honor, would be a disaster in King's Landing, and why no one else would support Ned in this endeavor. If Ned had gone with Renly, if he'd cut Stannis out, he would have perhaps succeeded, but he could not compromise his morals in this way. Then we have the loyalty versus survival. Ned stays obscenely loyal to Robert to the cost of his family. After Robert sends the command to have Daenerys unalived because she's now pregnant, Ned resigned. He could have left King's Landing. He could have gone, you know what? This is no longer my problem. This is no longer my king. I'm a go home. And his life would have been saved. Of course, there would have been no plot, but his life would have been saved. The story would have, his family would have been safe, and so on. But Ned couldn't bring himself to do that. And so his loyalty versus his survival is clashing internally, and the external plot events drive this conflict. And then he isn't that naive. People have a tendency of saying, like, Ned was super naive and so on. Ned wasn't that naive. Ned made a lot of plans. He bribed the gold cloaks. He knew what he needed to do to control the city. He had a reasonable plan to control the city. The problem was he trusted Littlefinger. That was the single linchpin that really screwed over Ned's plan. Littlefinger, and this was really just based on Ned going, well, Littlefinger is tied in loyalty to my wife's family. Of course he will support me because that is how it works, right? Littlefinger owes nothing to the Lannisters. He wouldn't support them. And he misjudged Littlefinger, and that event basically cascaded into his ultimate downfall. And that again comes from his internal tension because he believes so much in the system and in the justness of his whole world. If people are just, everything will work out, kind of thing. So his internal struggle basically manifests in his external decisions. Like he tells Cersei about his discovery of who the father of her children is, and that's honor over strategy. He trusts Littlefinger, as I said, and then he confesses to treason to save his daughters, putting his family over his honor. Okay. So that, I mean, have I shown, do you guys get how this all forms a cycle? Basically, the plot events feed the internal events, feed the plot events, feed the internal events. It's not just one or the other. They both add the tension ramping up on either side, as the plot causes internal reflection, which causes decisions, which causes plot events, which causes, and so on. Okay, so I hope I've shown that. So that then brings us to how all of this feeds into the themes. All right, so it creates a number of interesting themes. So we have the incompatibility of honor and power, which is basically Ned proves the point that an unwavering sense of honor can be a fatal weakness in a world driven by pragmatism. And then how do you get justice in an unjust world? He believes in the rule of law, but the story shows that law is only as strong as those who enforce it, really. And Ned's tragic fate is a theme around how idealism has costs, and he gave in to those costs to save his daughters' lives, but it was too late to even actually do that. He should have made those kinds of compromises way earlier if he was going to make those sorts of compromises. But if you really delve into Ned's story, as I did in preparation for this live stream, there's actually a different theme. There's a deeper theme underlying Ned's whole story. And that is this: is the law just? Okay, so let's go through all of the executions of the story. Now, bear in mind, the executions are basically the ultimate expression of the law, right? It's the highest form of punishment, and it's the kind of most extreme crimes you can commit. So the story opens. So in the prologue, we meet Garrett, and we know, the reader, that Garrett's fear in running away from the Night's Watch is completely rational. Garrett has seen the others, and no one believes him. He runs away from the Night's Watch because he is terrified of the others. Okay, now he's captured, and chapter 1 opens with Ned executing Garrett. And he kind of feels bad about it, as we learn later, because he's like, well, he has sympathy for the dude, but this is the law, right? This is, and his hands are tied because this is the law. But his hands are not really tied, right? This is a feudal system. He is the Lord of Winterfell. He could issue a pardon. He has virtually unlimited power. He chooses not to. He chooses to apply the law because he believes in the law. Okay, that's execution 1. Execution 2 is while they are traveling down to King's Landing. So Arya and the butcher's boy, whose name escapes me right now. I mean, he might just have been called the butcher's boy all along. But Arya and the butcher's boy are sparring on the road, right? And Joffrey finds them and he makes nasty remarks and blah, 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 blah. He's very Joffrey-ish. And Arya's direwolf Nymeria attacks Joffrey. And Joffrey goes crying to his mommy, and his mommy goes crying to the king, and they demand that Arya's direwolf is killed. Arya frees her direwolf and sends her into the woods, right? And so Joffrey or Queen Cersei, I can't remember which one of them, but one of them turn around and say, what about the other one? Let's execute that one. Okay. And Robert sides with them. There is no justice here. Lady did nothing. She had not behaved in any unjust way. So she is being killed in place of another wolf. There is zero justice here. But Robert, the king, had demanded this justice. And Ned saw that from Ned's perspective, he had no other choices. He has to follow his king's commands because that is the feudal system. And that brings us, reflecting back on that first execution where he executes Garrett, it's like the contrast is so sharp, right? Because there is no justice at all to be found in Lady's execution. And that makes it even more clear that Ned didn't have to execute Jared. He could have let him go under this system where basically, whoever is in charge of this feudal system is the one who determines the law. And there is also foreshadowing here, because just as Lady dies for another wolf's crime, Ned will die for Cersei's treason, right? Because Cersei betrayed her husband, slept with her brother, etc. Like that whole little treasonous affair is why Ned dies. All right. And then we come to the final execution of the book, which is Ned's execution. Ned confesses to treason, and this shows the systemic hypocrisy of the law in Westeros, right? He believes mercy will be granted, but Joffrey wields absolute authority, okay? And what this does, what that final execution does, is it's an inversion of Ned's values. He dies as a result of obedience to a legal framework that is fundamentally unjust. The law is the instrument of power. Okay, it is whatever the person highest on the totem pole says the law is, that is the law. And Ned, having failed to grasp that, as we can see through the executions where he was involved in, ends up in the position where that law is inverted on him. And okay, so that's my very long verbal essay on Ned Stark that I have been looking for an opportunity to talk about. So thank you for giving me that opportunity in this conversation of plot versus plot and character working together. Lupik says, you could also phrase it that Lady died for her family. Yes, absolutely. So Lady died in place of like Arya getting punished or anything like that. All right. So how does the second theme strengthen our of the law being a double-edged sword? How does that strengthen our virtuous cycle? Okay. So basically, Ned enforces the law without question, and because he believes in the system. But he realizes that the law is arbitrary, but he still chooses to act lawfully, like by supporting Stannis and so on, right? Instead of taking Renly's help, instead of doing the expedient thing, he tries to cling to this law that has already been shown to be a failure. Ned cannot seem to learn that the law is not what he thinks it is, despite the lesson that Lady should have taught him. Lady's death should have taught him that he cannot trust to the law, but he still attempts to cling to it. And to my mind, the theme that George R.R. Martin was trying to show here is that in this feudal society, the law is only as just as those who wield it. In Winterfell, Ned is the law and he is just. In King's Landing, Joffrey is the law and he is a tyrant. And Ned dies because he failed to see that the law is tied to the one who enforces it, not to any form of justice. Okay, so yeah, that's the secondary theme of Ned Stark, and how it works. So let's talk about how you can apply this in your own writing. So, to start with, let's talk about that virtuous cycle, how you build such a virtuous cycle of tension. You need to make sure your protagonist has internal conflict that is mirrored in the external events. So if the character values loyalty, you need to test it with betrayal. If the character desires power, show its cost. If the character clings to justice, place them in an unjust system. And then each choice needs to tighten the trap around them. Decisions should escalate tensions rather than resolve them. The protagonist should have agency. This is very important. Don't let them be just dragged along by the plot. They must make decisions, and those decisions must impact the external events, the plot events. And every path, every choice that they make should come with that cost, that internal cost. And then don't hammer blow your theme. You know, like you have to look for Martin's theme. It's not like justice is unjust and the law is actually just a tool of the powerful. He doesn't smack you in the face with it. It's shown through the plot consequences. The best themes come, they're not neatly resolved. There aren't easy answers. There's disputes about it. People can argue. People can read different things into the text. Those are the best themes, in my opinion. Matthew says he doesn't think that Ned was particularly blinkered in thinking Westerosi law was perfect. Yes. Yeah. So Ned thought that the law would be enough because it was on his side. And he was clearly wrong. And he could have learned that lesson from Lady's death. But, Martin wanted to drive a different point with Ned. And I think Ned was always scheduled to die. Because if Ned had returned to the Wall, he would have told Jon who his parents were, and that would change the whole thematic setup of the books. But yeah, I don't think he was blinkered, but he thought that he was enough to apply the law justly, and clearly he wasn't. All right, so let's talk about system critiquing, because a lot of people try to do this, and the problem isn't that they critique systems that they see around them. The problem is that they don't do it with enough foreshadowing, with enough weight, with enough um, room to breathe. There's too much hammer blow and not enough subtlety. So, use if you're going to critique a system through storytelling, use your early events to establish a character's belief system. Show them enforcing or believing in a rule that seems just, that looks just, and make sure that the reader sees the potential cracks in the belief. Like Jared's execution. Yes, it's the law, but you didn't need to follow it. And then introduce a setting where the system works differently or where the system fails, like with Lady's execution. And then force the character to rely on that system to save themselves. And then either show the system betraying them or them finding a way around it, depending on whether you're doing a tragedy or not. But you must give each of these steps room to breathe. Okay. If you look at the length of a Game of Thrones, it is a long book. There is a lot that happens in it. These 3 executions are separated by chunks of story because every moment is given room to breathe. Martin doesn't rush the story. He takes his time. He explores the system. He lets the reader live into it. And he shows other people's perspectives on the same system and how they use it. And then gradually leans into this. Actually, this whole system is inherently corrupted, and there is a systemic problem in the application of law under this feudal society. And we know that Martin does, that Martin does have these feelings about how certain types of fantasy sort of glorify feudal societies, and in part, I think he did want to write a critique on why feudal societies are not great and why there are systemic problems with them. Okay, so yeah, that is my character design. I think I'm at the end of my slides. And so the core thing that I try to do now, I'm saying I try to do it, and I do try to do it. Bear in mind that I am not George R.R. Martin. I might or might not actually pull this off in my stories, but I do try to do that internal external thing where you ratchet up the event. So there's a plot event and it causes an internal reaction. And the internal reaction makes a choice. The choice creates a plot event. The plot event creates an internal reaction. And I try and kind of escalate the tension upwards towards the climax in that kind of virtuous circle, always kind of surrounding my core themes. The core character growth arcs and the core thematic elements of my book. So always trying to kind of circle that core theme and create that virtuous cycle of internal tension, external tension, feeding the theme. Yeah, whether I pull it off or not is a different question, but that's what I try. And so I also wanted to share with you where I think like Martin really pulled this off in spectacular fashion, especially with Ned Stark's storyline. And so I hope that you enjoyed my conversation about plot and character and internal tension. And please hit me with whatever questions you guys have. Oh, also, if you want more thoughts like this, because I do write stuff like this in my newsletter, There's a link in the description to my newsletter. It's completely free. It comes out once every 3 months. So it comes out 4 times a year. And it's got like all kinds of details in it. And, it's got some updates on my projects, obviously, but it also has like my thoughts on world building and larger cycles and all that kind of details. And I see there's a lot of members in the chat. Thank you very much to all of my members for being here. They are, for a price for a cup of coffee a month, you can support the channel and get priority comments. And there's also an exclusive member live stream once a month. So to do the pitches for money things that have to happen in this YouTube environment. And thank you to YouTube, a YouTube user. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Yeah. Thanks, Tony. I very much appreciate that. So Stephen says what he took from this is that we have to establish the character's belief and motivation and then have those aspects tested by the plot. Yes, exactly. You want to establish the belief and the motivation, and you want to have that and the plot clash. You want to have them basically ratchet each other up. But you want to get I cannot emphasize enough how much you need to let the story breathe. Like, there is nothing inherently wrong with Rings of Power story. There's nothing inherently wrong. I mean, the Rings of Power story is basically the story of an incredibly arrogant woman learning not to be so arrogant and learning that sometimes she needs people, right? That is basically the arc that they have for Galadriel. It could be a compelling story. The problem is that that those writers gave no character moments at all. They basically just charged in and went like, this is Galadriel, she's awesome, now let's hit the plot. And by the end of the first episode, she's going to defy the king and jump off a boat into the ocean. And it's like, there has been not a second to breathe. And that's the problem with so many shows are they're just like da, 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 plot beat. And it's like, just give me a second. Let me meet the character. Let me experience this. So yes, subtlety, absolutely, but also just room to breathe. Just give the character a little space. Give the reader a little moment. And thank you, Matthew. I am so glad that I've ignited your passion for reading and world building and so on. And I hope that you write that story. I hope I read it someday. Destiny says, yeah, you have to build the character into your narration and you have to create those character moments. JR says, so pacing comes into this as well. Absolutely. So pacing is a difficult thing because obviously you don't want to slow this down till it's just gone, right? You want to spend some time on it, but you don't want to write such a slog that readers go, well, this is worse than Tolkien, and don't finish the book, But you do want to give just little breathing moments to give a moment gravitas. If you go and read again that scene of Lady's execution, Martin doesn't just rush through it. He doesn't just go like boom and she's dead. There's time given to it. We see Sansa's grief. We see Arya's guilt. We see Ned's anger and rage. Like, we see all of these things. They're all there. We have time to absorb the impact of the event. Destiny says, yes, this is why season 8 of Game of Thrones didn't work. It was all just plot point, plot point, plot point, plot point, with no transition. There was no transition. There was no room to breathe. Basically, like I like to describe the problem with season 8 like this. In one episode, Danny and John are being all Disney prince and princess. John has got his own dragon now. The two of them are sitting on their dragons. They go on a dragon flight together. Everything is very much like Disney prince and princess awesome. The next episode, Danny burns down King's Landing. What? Like, I have no problem with Dana Race going mad. I have no problem with her following that Targaryen path. But give me, not from the previous episode they're flying, the next episode burn it all down. It was just, there was just too much. It was just one thing after the other, da 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 da, and it just destroyed the entire series actually, because they just didn't close anything, and then, like, why was Arya the prince that was promised? Why did she kill the Night King? How did that line up? It was just, it was bananas. There was no build up, there was no character moments, there was no breath. It was just jump cut, jump cut, jump cut, jump cut, and that's the problem with way too many of the big fantasy shows these days. And I think part of it is that they put too much money into any given episode, because instead of making, like, say, a 12 or a 15 episode series, 15 episode season, they make like 8 episodes, and they make them all with like a movie's budget. And it's like, okay, guys, but that doesn't actually give me the time. It doesn't give me the time to get to know the characters, to invest in the world. And that's part of the problem, right? Because as fantasy writers, we're not just writing characters and plot. You also have to invest the reader in the world. And that means you need to spend enough time in the world. You need to give the world enough breathing room that the reader can absorb your world building and live in your world. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is, Wirbis, it's I 100% blame Dan and Dave, because HBO offered them another season. HBO offered them more episodes, but they were in such a hurry to go make Star Wars or whatever that they were like, no, we'll just wrap it up in 8 episodes. Like, HBO was like, please take the time you need. Nope. They just gunned through it. No, I blame those two like a lot. A whole bundle load. And in the end, they didn't get to make Star Wars, because Star Wars took one look at the mess of season 8 and was like, nope, not a chance. Although in hindsight, it didn't really make a huge difference. Yeah, so I enjoyed Arcane, but it is very fast paced. That first, it feels like it's too packed. That if you don't know the world at all, like I didn't know the world. I think it's based on League of Legends, and that's a game I never got into. And Arcane, and if you don't know the world at all, Arcane is there's so many storylines that you have no time to absorb the plot. So I found it a little dense. I found it a little fast for me personally. I've like, yeah. If you if you take one thing away from this in terms of pacing, it's like give character moments, give plot moments, give them space to breathe. Don't rush through them. I feel like there is this tendency, and you see it sometimes in the way that people say, "Oh, you must start a book with the action and so on." No, not necessarily. Like maybe it works to start the book with the action, but start the book with the character and give me a moment to invest in the character and give me a moment to understand the world before you expect me to just race through the action. You know, um, and even when like smoke dementia's made a comment here, which I mean, I understand the point she's making. They're just on a boat and nothing else is happening. And the thing is, like, those travel moments are actually amazing for character building. As long as you can maintain some level of tension, then you can use travel to build the character, to up that internal tension that I was talking about. And then when they leave that boat, they're immediately confronted with a plot event that the reader now understands, because we spent a scene on the boat with the character going through the internal tension. So use travel like that. It's a good, yeah. The reader absolutely needs to see some of the slice of life of the character. That doesn't mean your whole story should be slice of life, not at all, okay? But the reader needs to see some elements of a slice of life. You want to have maybe, a little bit of like the character's home life, the character buying something for his mother or for her child or for a lover or whatever. Like, show a little bit of life of the character so that the reader can invest more in the character. Yeah. Brandon Sanderson actually used travel pretty well with Shallan. And I didn't like Shallan much as a character, but the travel scenes were still pretty good. And he used it also to build out the world and to kind of show some of the creatures and so on. I did do an episode on travel. Yes, I did. I have a very extensive library. I swear I should start making like updated videos on some of the older stuff. But yeah, there is a how to write travel hidden somewhere in there, in that mess I call a back catalog. Yeah, Patton is fun. No, you're right. I enjoyed Patton from Shallan, but Shallan herself, oh my goodness. Anyway, um, my problem with Shallan wasn't actually Shallan. My problem with Shallan was that at the beginning, I found her a touch whiny, and I'm not super fond of whiny characters. Towards the middle of the second book, she stopped irritating me. But the first book, I was like, I feel like you need to stop whining now and start participating in the plot. um, so I had the same problem with Sansa. I was like, you need to stop whining and participate in the plot. But by the fourth book, I think, Sansa really, I was like into Sansa's chapters all the way. She'd gotten over her whining and invested in the plot. So yeah. Yeah. When yeah, the three persona things with Shallan, I wasn't sure about, hey. Um, I mean, it worked, but it got a little long in the tooth. Although I'll be honest, like I haven't managed to finish Wind and Truth. So I don't know if anybody else has in the chat yet. I'm I'm about 3 or 4 chapters in, and I'm, like, a little bit bored. Um, so, um, yeah, Wind and Truth is not holding me as tight as I'd hoped. Um, I'll probably get through it, even if I have to resort to the audiobook and listen to it while I run. Um, yeah, yeah. Like, the first book, Way of Kings, was really great. Like, I loved Way of Kings. Um, the second book was good, but it wasn't as good as Way of Kings. The third book, I was like, you know, you know. um, but I will probably get through it because I do like um, a lot of Sanderson's writing, even if I'm not always a fan of every aspect. um, yeah. But yeah, so maybe someday I'll do a deep dive into Kaladin's character in Way of Kings, like specifically Bridge 4 and Kaladin's story arc, which was a very, very interesting story arc, in terms of dealing with PTSD and all of those complications. I thought it was very well done. So I have yapped on for nearly an hour. Um, if there are no further questions, then I will say good night to you all. And thank you very much for spending, uh, Saturday with me. Thank you for being part of my audience. Without you guys, I would absolutely not even have this, channel. So I do appreciate everybody who is here and who listens to my stuff and everything else. And yeah, I will see you for a video on Tuesday, and otherwise, I will see you for a live stream in a month's time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye.